Hello and welcome back to Stories Across Borders. For those who aren't familiar, here we discuss stories told across a wide array of different mediums. The only rule is that we can only discuss things in terms of storytelling. Things like acting, mechanics, art, all of that are off limits unless they have a direct impact on the way a narrative is being told. My name is Daniel Radford, author, a mess, and also your host. As I so often am, I am joined today by John Kernan as we continue our cycle on genre blending. Today we're focusing on a more specific example of genre blending, fittingly taking a look at Everything's Gonna Be Okay, an American dramedy created by an Australian comedian, Josh Thomas.
Oh,
When I had the idea for doing genre blending as a theme for a cycle, it was very quickly followed by the thought of using this show for one of the focused episodes. Like almost an immediate kind of progression there. Because as a
we like the
dramedy, I
show here.
think, yeah, I mean, I do just like it a lot, but uh, as a dramedy, I think it combines comedy and drama in equal measure very well and often juxtaposes them in interesting ways. And when I think of dramedies and genre blending done well in general, those are things that come to mind.
Yeah, I think the show does it really well. It doesn't, I mean, dr dramedy dramedy is funny because it's one of the most common combinations. I think because of how common it is, people underestimate how easy it actually is for drama and comedy to step on each other's toes still. The fact that it's common does not make it any worse, and sometimes there's a lot of good shows where sometimes they still they can still make mistakes with that every now and then, and I can't really think of any examples off the top of my head where it actually happens here. And it's one of the nice things is that you could it never makes you feel awkward about it trying to be dramatic because it's been funny and jokey, and it never makes you feel like it can't be funny just because it's serious and has some pretty heavy moments.
Yeah, I mean, I think the reason that it succeeds so well in balancing those two things is because it is very true to life. Like even when things are overblown a bit for the sake of entertainment, the core of it is still very realistic and real, and as a result, poignant.
Yeah. The title kind of says it all when it comes to how relatable it is.
Well, yeah, I mean, exactly the idea of like it is a show that is about coping, and so often that is what life feels like it
Everything's gonna
comes
be
down to.
okay. Yeah,
Yeah, like
for
how
real.
often have we like have you or I or anyone else found themselves having just gone through an absolute hell of a week, going, if I can just get through these next couple of days, everything will be fine.
Yeah, exactly. Also, just generic regular response when when things are really bad and you don't know what else to do and somebody tries to be sympathetic with you. It's like, "Oh, what's going on? Don't worry about it. Everything's gonna be fine.
Oh,
It's
that
great."
honestly, you are so very right. Uh, or it's always everything's going to be okay, which I don't mind as much. That's fine because it's true.
Or
But or
everything's
or
fine.
you'll get everything's fine, and that drives me mad because it's like clearly everything is not fine.
Yeah,
if everything was
maybe it will be, but it's not right now.
if everything was fine, I would not be lying in bed in agony wishing for death.
Like, not everything is okay, but it will be. It's gonna
Exactly.
be.
It is going to be, yeah. But yeah, I think that's why this show balances the two so well and it works out so well is because it does have that very real feeling to it. It is a very relatable thing, even if it's not necessarily all the experiences that you've had. It's going to have similarities to things you've experienced enough that you're going to be able to relate very easily to it. to at least some of the characters, because it deals with a bunch of different characters and different points of their lives too,
True.
and all the assorted awkwardness of that
Yeah.
phase in your
They're
life,
all
or
at different ages and have very different, very real issues.
yeah. So
Also, can't think of any other shows I've seen that, without it being a show entirely about it, let autism as a thing be so forefront in the story and with such an important character, and
yeah,
also just handles it really well.
yeah.
She's a very good autistic character.
I am not someone who like generally looks that hard for representation in a story, because I don't necessarily go into stories looking for people who are like me. But
Plus, I mean, there's a lot of characters who are definitely on the spectrum. They just don't usually like tell us. There's a lot of characters you can just, for the most part, autistic representation is actually just characters that nobody says it, but you look at them and go, "Oh, you."
I mean, honestly, those are often the better ones, because a lot of the times when a show is very open about the fact that a character is autistic, it's done very
Not many of those
poorly.
are good.
You either get characters who are setting expectations way too high, or who are setting expectations way too low.
Yeah, exactly.
Uh, one of my
Um,
one of my favorite
oh, sorry, go ahead.
examples of it being done very poorly is actually I've never really watched it, but and this is a large part of why, but there's a show called The Good Doctor,
Oh
and
yeah.
I think people think it's positive representation, right? Because the titular good doctor is very autistic and also a surgeon. The thing is, with his degree of functionality, there is no way in hell he could be a surgeon.
Hmm. Oh boy.
And it yeah, it does it's just it sets up some unrealistic expectations, and shows from the very beginning that the writers did not have a great understanding of what they were working with. Compare this to Everything's Gonna Be Okay, where the show is very aware of where the character would excel and where she would struggle. And
Yeah.
a lot of
It
that is
it helps that
because
they let themselves just have an autistic actor for her.
yeah, I mean, I don't think it's necessary to have an autistic actor play an autistic character, but
No.
the fact that it's not the fact that they let her draw on her own experiences definitely did help, and so did the fact that the writers consulted her to say, "Does this fit?"
Yeah.
I remember reading an article somewhere where she apparently provided just buckets of information to them about how things would actually go, and like mannerisms and things that the character could have and things like that, which is the most autistic thing I've ever heard.
Yeah. No, I mean it's really good. The only other example I can think of off the top of my head of an autistic character done just about as well, which I guess fits because it's in a completely different medium, being animated, is in the most recent TMNT show, actually, Rise of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Donatello is very directly and heavily coded as autistic,
Ah, interesting. I've
and he's a very good and lovable character in that. But you see lots of things here and there that point at it, like he's not just the smart one. He doesn't read or get into social cues nearly as well as his brothers. He's actually a very affectionate person, but he shows his affection completely different than the others, and has things like, if he initiates touch with somebody, it's okay. But if somebody just suddenly touches him, it's and lots of other little things here and there. But like,
I am
somebody ended
I
up
feel
making an
that
entire video I
myself, so
watched
it's
about all the autistic coding in the character, and I thought it's
It's
It
like
made
you
me
said though. That's a
enjoy it.
very that's a like that is a very coded character without it being outright stated, which happens. Which is it's weird how
Yeah.
often a
And to be fair,
coded
I feel like
character.
that one's only outright stated because it's really hard to come up with an excuse to tell a turtle they're autistic.
Maybe, but I feel like that happens a lot, right? Where you get coded characters who are just so much more accurate or better written than the characters who are outright supposed to be a thing.
Yeah, it's because I I like to call it writer's room syndrome, which is a very real disease that a lot more characters have than characters who have autism, and that's the problem of when something is openly a lot of times when something is openly decided as one of the character traits, especially if they decide to go to the trouble of outright telling the audience, it's a lot easier for the author to slip into letting that define the character, which means, especially with a condition like autism, that so many people at least actually have a little bit of, but so few people embrace or genuinely understand. That leads to a lot of characters where if you get told they are autistic, good job. Now they're the autistic one. That's what that character is, the autistic one.
Yeah, you might be right, which is it's a problem, and there's only one way we're going to deal with that, and that is more shows like Everything's Going to Be Okay, where it's handled well, and the more often that happens, the less the writers' room issue will be a thing, I suppose. Although, obviously
Yeah,
some positive change in society would be beneficial there.
we can finally start getting used to it. And honestly, everything's gonna be okay is one of the shows that helped me start getting used to it. I mean, I've met a decent number of people who, once again, are at least mildly on the spectrum before. Only a couple who are like really deep in, but like I feel like I've actually met a lot of people I've been able to tell on my own are autistic before they ever said anything to me since watching Everything's Gonna Be Okay. It genuinely taught me a lot about like not only signs to look out for on the spectrum. I don't care as much about that. I don't need to know if someone's autistic, but it also helped me do way better at understanding and interacting with people who are more heavily on the spectrum. I say more heavily just because if only because like it's easier to interact with people who are less heavily on the spectrum, obviously, because
Yeah, I mean,
there's less to understand.
the thing with like stuff like heavily on the spectrum, not heavily on it's complicated, and the language around it is complicated, and it's constantly evolving at the moment. So
That's why that's the best way I can think of to
yeah,
word it. I'm not gonna say someone who's really autistic.
yeah, it's complicated, and I hope this ages well, especially because I'm basically talking about a demographic I'm in.
Yeah.
But the thing as well is that oh, I'm gonna save that point. We'll get back. We'll get to that later. I think maybe it's a better idea before we just barrel down and do an entire episode on autistic representation in media.
One day.
Maybe. Might be a good idea to actually explain to our audience what the hell we're talking about now that we're 15 minutes in.
I mean, the middle or the older sister slash middle child of the family is autistic. Kayla's the
Yes,
actor, Matilda.
Matilda is the character. But I was going to say, maybe you should explain the premise of the show, which is basically,
Oh my God.
yeah.
You're right.
Uh,
Oh
Basically,
no.
this entomologist from Australia is over in the US visiting his dad, who ran off with an American lady at some point, had two children with her. She died at some point, and he's now raising those children by himself. The character Nicholas is
And he would
over in the
love to keep
US.
doing that.
Yeah, is over there to just sort of hang out with his family over in the US, basically. And yeah, he would love to continue raising them on his own. The problem with that is that in the very first episode, we learn that he has terminal cancer.
And there's where we have the first not only justification, but really genuine vibe of what the title means and why it's there.
Yeah, I mean,
Because what else are you supposed to tell yourself when you find out that you're that there's only one other adult in the family who, in his own way, really shouldn't be ready to raise kids,
yeah,
and your
I
dad's
mean,
gonna die?
he has a list, but the list is not very important for very long.
No, and like, part of the whole point of it really is that like Nicholas is not in a position to be a parent when this show starts.
No, definitely not. But even before getting into him having to learn all that, like just the reaction that they both him and his father have to this discussion is very real because neither of them can really handle it.
Nope.
Nicholas just sort of
Dad's
straight up
dad's not
stands
ready to
up,
die.
walks outside for a minute, and is like trying to like wrap his head around what he's just heard, whilst his dad is desperately trying to get him to focus on his daughters because that's his world. That's what's important to him.
He's only got so much time to try to make sure that for the rest of their lives they're going to be okay without him.
Yeah, it's and it's interesting, right? Because there's in the all very quickly in succession we get drama and comedy and awkwardness and sadness and poignancy because of those other elements all at once. And I think those very early scenes already set the tone for the entire rest of the series and explain, and you can get a feel for what this is going to be. Because it is funny and heartbreaking simultaneously what you see going on screen.
Yeah, much like a lot of the stuff that happens in real life. I mean, obviously this isn't going to apply to everybody, and for me it's at least partially like a survival mechanism, but I tend to usually find at least one thing that's kind of funny in even my darkest moments
No, I'm
leads to some moments where like I should be crying and instead I'm kind of laughing,
no, I'm the same.
even though I feel like crying.
Humor is my coping mechanism. I have been in the back of an
Yeah.
ambulance cracking jokes because it was the only thing keeping me somewhat sane.
Me too. I was making jokes when my knee was twisted around backwards.
Yeah,
The nurses looked very concerned, and I was like, listen, would you rather me be freaking out?
um, yeah, I was very ill. I mean, as you know, I'm still haven't really gotten over that. It's just better than it was. I became very ill in 2015, had multiple ambulance trips as a result. And one of the ways I coped with the worst of it was to continuously make self deprecating jokes about the entire situation.
Yeah. But I
Because
mean,
if you can laugh about something, it cannot hurt you as much. Humor is
as
armor.
long as you can find something to laugh about, everything's gonna be all right.
I can't believe you fucked up the title drop.
That was on purpose, because I did it earlier.
Okay. But yeah,
No, I
so
already caught myself doing that earlier because this is gonna sound weird. Every time I think about the title in words, my brain says all right, but when I think about the letter abbreviation, it's still an O that's there instead of an A.
fair enough.
I
But
don't know
yeah,
why.
so that's the situation. Like, it only gets even more awkward because Nicholas is like fling. I have just forgotten his name. Oh no, Alex.
Alex?
Alex, yeah, shows up because he was planned to be there because Nicholas thought his dad was going to be somewhere else, and that's when he got it dropped on him. So the guy he's planning to sleep with rocks up in the middle of all this and just inadvertently gets dragged into this extremely awkward conversation.
Yep.
It is
And
such a mess, and because it is such a mess, it is funny. But at the same time, there is
to Alex's credit, man handles it like a champ.
he does his best. But that entire sequence of events, it is uncomfortable to
Hmm.
extreme levels, very funny, and always with this undercurrent of like you know that it's funny because these people like the humor is coming from the fact that these characters are all barely keeping it together at this moment, and being awkward and funny is the only thing making it make it so they have any chance of getting through this conversation.
It's the closest they can come to being fully functioning human beings right now.
Yeah. So yeah, that's where things are introduced to us in the first episode. We also, of course, meet the other two main characters in the show. Genevieve, who is a 14-year-old girl who is the most functional person in that family.
She is the quote unquote normal one, although she's still not
No,
super normal
she's
herself.
definitely a weirdo, but in the best possible way, of course. I say that.
And I
She's
she's the one who doesn't have any serious either
cog.
psychological or actually genetic issues that we know of.
Yeah, no, no, she's definitely neurotypical and not disabled, and is
Most of her problems are actually dealing with a mixture, kind of being stuck between two worlds in that she's the only one in her family not dealing with that stuff, while at the same time in like the heaviest hitting part of puberty and growing into yourself in the regular part of her life away from her family at school and stuff, and kind of being bouncing between those two worlds while all this stuff is going on.
I will say I'm gonna get back on that other stuff, but to say I do want to say she is definitely dealing with all that stuff that Matilda and Nicholas are, like with the neurodivergence and stuff like that. And one of the things I appreciate about the
Well,
show is
that's
the
what I
fact that
mean, I
they
guess,
do
is that
show
she's
that she
dealing with
has
it.
to deal with the other side of that.
Yeah,
Uh,
that's one of the things about the show I like that's honest, right? Is like a lot of things, a lot of writers seem to think that the only way to really well represent any kind of, especially neurodivergent things, other things too, sexuality and all that, but like neurodivergent conditions are one of the things it can be really, really hard to find genuine two-sided representation for. Because everyone's so afraid that the only way you're allowed to have it in your story is to only show the positives.
yeah, and
And
that I mean
everything's
that's
going to be okay is not afraid to show us both sides of it to make it real.
yeah, I mean that's one of the things I appreciate about it, right? That's what I was saying. I had issues with like the Good Doctor is because it's not there's no truth to that, and the truth of it is that yeah, there can actually be benefits that come with being autistic, assuming you're on
Of
the
course.
excuse the likely outdated language, but the more high functioning side of things. Absolutely.
I mean,
But the
I
reality
would say
is that
high functioning is still a fair phrase.
probably. I don't know. Again, the language
It,
is evolving very quickly right now. But
that's true. I only see that term as there because some people are genuinely really heavily debilitated by it, whereas others
yeah,
aren't.
I don't have any problems with the term, but I'm one person, you know. Yeah, it's the whilst there can be positives, it absolutely hampers your life and makes things significantly more difficult, even if you are on the more high functioning side. Because
Yeah, I mean, there's always going to be
we exist in a society that is not built for us.
no, and like we really like, I mean, heck, that's why it's called neurodivergent, right? And
Yeah.
you could even just leave it at we exist in a society because anything that just makes your brain inherently work different from most other people's is always going to cause you at least some problems. Like humans, humans are social creatures of pattern recognitions. And when you don't do the social parts the same as everybody, as most other people, and you don't have the same patterns or recognize patterns the same, both things that don't necessarily do but can happen with these conditions, that's always going to make life harder.
Yeah,
It's just part of being human, and that's
exactly.
true whether that stuff is caused by being neurodivergent or any of the other things that can make you significantly different from people. But I consider the neurodivergent stuff usually more significant because that's a much more base primal level of your brain is not the same.
Yeah, I mean, exactly. But by the same token, it could also make it difficult for neurotypical people to understand us.
Yes, yes, it definitely goes.
And
It goes both ways.
yeah, I think that that's one of the things that I appreciate here and that I respect about this, and that I think a lot of shows miss, is that just because we are the other doesn't mean we are never at fault.
Yeah,
It's not
it
just on the world to do better understanding us, we also have to do better at understanding the world because that's just the world we exist in, and it's not fair, I feel, for us to make no effort to understand the way neurotypical people think either. And that's where a lot of the complication in dealing with Matilda comes from, is that she has to learn that the world doesn't really care that she's autistic.
Nope. And unfortunately, for the most part, up until the show starts, don't get me wrong, by all accounts, it seems like Dad was a pretty good dad. But he
To his
also
daughters, anyway.
he almost kind of did a little too good of a job protecting her because she's actually, when the show starts at least, pretty sheltered from the kinds of connections and interference in her life that would get her to start really understanding the differences between her and neurotypical people more and how to actually deal with being out in the world.
Yeah, exactly. I mean,
Because,
Matilda's.
like you might not guess from immediately looking at her, but she is 17. She's just shy of being an adult.
Yeah, Matilda is 17. She is sheltered. She is autistic. She is a very talented pianist who is applying for Juilliard. But that like playing the piano is her one skill.
Yeah,
She is completely lacking an understanding of how the world works beyond that narrow interest of hers.
that's
And
kind of one of the only things you could really say, like, because overall he seemed like a pretty good dad. Once again, to his daughters at least.
yeah,
That was the real mistakes that the dad made. But to be fair, I would almost call it a half mistake because I'm pretty sure he was planning to try to get her more interacted with all that stuff and ready at some point, but he ended up not being given the time he thought he had.
probably, yeah. I mean, it's hard to say because they never really address how much he had planned.
That's fair. It seemed
Because
like he
he's
had a
not
lot
really the
planned.
focus. Like the performance and the character were both brilliant, but he is only in it for that first episode. The first episode, in fact, actually concludes with his funeral, basically. Well, there's a little bit after that, but
Yeah,
the funeral, for the record, is, even though it is in the first episode, one of my favorite scenes in the entirety of the show.
it's one of the best.
Yeah.
As
Uh,
well it should be. I mean, his death is the inciting incident.
yeah, I mean, like, just from the awkwardness of, a bunch of people who don't really care, like, expressing all these condolences and all that to people who just want to grieve and get through the event or try and as you're in the process of figuring out what the fuck they're doing with their lives now, to Genevieve, worrying about her appearance and being so desperate to be involved and nearly dropping the coffin.
Yeah. Another thing
Which
that's like super true to life.
that happened actually at a funeral. The only funeral I've ever been to.
Oh no. It didn't
Uh,
happen at the only funeral I've ever been to. I can say that much at least.
yeah, I mean they managed to not drop it in the end. It wasn't quite as dramatic as how close Genevieve came to just spilling her dad on the floor, but
That would have been awkward.
fitting really. But yeah, it's something that does happen, and it was very real and uncomfortable, and therefore funny. And also the entire eulogy that Matilda did was amazing.
Yeah. No, it
I
that
you
scene is so real for so many different reasons.
yeah, it hits you because of how believable it is that you and because the funny is believable but so is the sadness, you end up getting a very strange mix of emotions.
Yeah, and
It's
honestly,
almost
one of the things that
more humor than sadness at the funeral. It's everything it's the aftermath when they're alone that you feel the sadness.
yeah, and I think that's really true to funerals because it's kind of one of the things you see so often about funerals actually is like nobody is supposed to act sad at a funeral. Everybody, part of the problem is that it's a social gathering, and humans actually tend to be really bad at being social and mourning at the same time. So when you have a literal social gathering for the purpose of mourning, it makes humans weird.
I mean, it does because you've got people who are there who are only there because it's a responsibility. You have people who are there because they're genuinely grieving. There's all the organization and just the like logistical aspects to it that get in the way, and it's a very
Yeah,
complicated affair.
everything gets in the way of everything else because it's inherently idiosyncratic and oxymoronic even, I would almost say. Like
Well, yeah, because it's not
the
like the
people
dead
who are
person cares.
the people who are there out of social obligation are are awkward and itched at by the mourning side of things, and the people who are there to grieve get to be messed up by the social side of things because
Yeah,
they can't actually just sit there and silently grieve. That's not what a funeral is.
yeah. It's funny we mentioned this actually because I finished it a couple weeks ago before we had actually decided on doing this cycle. Even I actually just finished writing a short story called Procession, which is
There
about a sort of 20-something-year-old person in the front row at a funeral. Just sort of
we go.
just the entire thing is about this person contemplating, who is this for? What am I doing here?
Yeah.
And is it okay that any of this is happening? And oh God, I'm marching toward my own funeral. Like, is there going to be some asshole in the front row of my own funeral going, who is this for? What am I here? Who gives a shit?
Yeah.
And
It's
that will be available, the transcript for that, on my website at some point in the future, as well as a reading on my YouTube channel. Not entirely sure exactly when, but it's coming.
Mhm.
But yeah, so the funeral's funny, and then it's after the funeral that we get that release of like we realize because there's the limo ride back where they're all they're upset and trying to deal with their emotions, and then they get back home and they're like trying to navigate being alone with each other for the first time really, and also dealing with the emotions because they've got Matilda who doesn't like hugs, and
no.
Genevieve who's her instinct is to retreat and be alone, and Nicholas who all he wants is to be with people and have a hug.
Yeah.
Because that's how he
He really
copes.
needs a hug.
And in the end, it's such a beautiful scene where Matilda's like, "Look, I'm not gonna hug you because that's not what I do. It makes me feel very uncomfortable, but I'll dance with you. And
Yeah, I mean,
we get this,
you got to find your comfort.
yeah, we get this really beautiful like montage, which starts as just them dancing around to a really good song. I can't remember what's by. I think it's called Lonely City. But they're dancing around. They're throwing the funeral flowers around. Eventually, they manage to drag Genevieve into it, and that's their release. That they finally let it all out basically, and we conclude with them all just sort of climbing into bed together, and
Yep.
it's it's very sweet, very very beautiful, and very poignant. I like that. And
They
poignancy
all,
is,
because
is
one
something I'm
thing
going to
they
say a
all
lot
share
through
is
this
to
episode.
spend a night not alone.
And that's where the story continues from. Basically, is is that that's that a lot of the recurring elements of that story are their joint arc, I guess, is learning how to coexist and cope with each other in these new lives, simultaneously with having to cope with their actual lives. Because, again, a recurring thing that comes up a lot is that the world isn't going to adjust for them just because they're grieving.
Yeah, for real.
Nicholas has to learn how to, navigate becoming a parental figure, basically, at the same time as navigating his dad's death and a new relationship. Genevieve has
And
to
a new relationship that was originally meant to just be a fling at that.
yeah, and
Him and Alex were not really planning to be
long
serious
term, yeah,
boyfriends.
yeah, he was going back to Australia, and then he wasn't.
And then he wasn't.
Uh,
And he didn't.
you know, and it's not like he's parenting. It's not like he's got an easy, like quotation marks, as easy as parenting ever is, easy job of it either, because he's dealing with, Matilda, who is almost an adult, but has no concept of how to function in an adult world. He has to learn all about how to manage, basically, raising someone autistic, and
And
then and
Genevieve, who's
Genevieve,
not
who's
only at a
just
very naturally turbulent time of her life, but is also already kind of trying way too hard to be an adult before it's time.
exactly, and he has to manage all that, and then Genevieve herself is again she's trying to manage the complex, confusing, and nightmarish web of social politics that is high school,
Ugh.
on top of, just trying to figure out who she is as a person, because that's a lot of what she's doing during the first season and a little bit during the second, but is just
Yeah.
is exploring herself and who she is and what she cares about, is interested in doing, because she's a creative person. We learn pretty quickly, but she's not creative in the same way as Matilda is. She does things like poetry and writes stories,
Yeah.
and she's trying to figure out where to direct that creativity and how to be who she is, and doing that all at the same time again, whilst dealing with grief and burying a lot of it a lot of the time, because she's desperately trying to be the adult in a house where
In a house where sometimes the person who is now her guardian
is
isn't
not.
really that much of an adult himself.
Yeah, he's very neurotic. And have you
Yes.
finished it? Did you manage to finish
Neurotic
those
is the
last few
appropriate word.
episodes?
No, I'm still mostly a season one baby.
I will not explain why he's having so much trouble then.
I think I can take a guess.
Yeah, it's
Um,
it's it's not that subtle, and
I don't I don't know for
yeah.
sure if I'm gonna get there, but let's just say I think one of the problems might run in the family a little bit more
Yep, you nailed it.
because he certainly has a lot of signs
Yep.
that I know of.
Nope, you 100% nailed it. His arc in the second season is realizing this and going, "Oh, oh, that explains a lot."
Yeah, it does. It really does.
And it also
And
deals
and
with
and
other
part of why
people's
that's so
reactions to it.
oh, and part of why that's so interesting is like
You're staticky. Hold on.
oh maybe my internet fell apart for a
It,
second.
it's
There was
it is better
there's been a
now.
bit of a snowstorm over here, so I might be a little patchier than normal. Um, but yeah, no, if my guess is right, which considering we would have been saying it, right, for the audience anyways, like spoilers for season 2 of the show, if anybody, well, actually, not enough people have watched this show, so maybe I shouldn't say it anyways,
I mean,
even if I
we've
did guess
skated
right.
around it enough that if anyone's thinking about it enough, they're gonna get it. But we'll leave it at that because I can
Yeah.
say with confidence we are on the same page.
But yeah, I think that's a very interesting and good thing to pull off because it's something that would make him a little more like it was something that would make him simultaneously more alike and more different from the people around him. And I think that's good because another thing you don't see very often with representation is not only showing both sides of it on an individual level, but showing how two people who fit into the same potential group of
Are alike and
representation, if
also
you will,
unlike. Yeah,
can still be completely different people.
yeah. I mean, the show is fantastic about that in general because again, Matilda's part of like a specialized. I believe it's just autistic. It's a class at her school, and we see because she interacts so much with Drea and with
True, yeah, you're right.
what's his name?
Why is there a tiny piece of chocolate on my desk? Get out of here.
What was his name? The boy.
Al? Oh, I don't remember the other students in class names. They don't show up enough.
Jeremy. It was
Oh,
Jeremy.
right.
Yeah, because we see Drea especially, but also Jeremy quite a bit as well, and they are have their own quirks and confusions in dealing with things and navigating the world. And I appreciate we see three different takes on living with the same uh, neurodivergence because it makes it clear which that not all the same.
And part of the reason I think that's so good is not just to give us a broader understanding of the thing as a whole, but actually, I think an unsung benefit of that, which is why I really wish more stories that wanted to represent things would have more than just one example. I mean, and I'm not just talking about tokenism, because there's a lot of stories that handle it at least well enough that I would never call the character a token character, but they're still like the only one where like I think having multiple characters with the same condition who are still so completely different makes it a lot easier for people who might not have understood the condition before
To
to do a
understand it.
better job, not just understanding it, but seeing those people as individuals with a condition instead of an individual with the condition, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it's an important, central, and significant part of their lives, but it is not all that they are. They have other
It's
things
not
they
who
want.
they are.
Boy, do they have other things that they want. Uh,
Yeah, they.
and yeah, the show is willing to explore that and explore navigating all of that because a big part of Matilda's thing is that she's planning to go off to Juilliard and she wants to experience relationships and sexuality and things like that, which is a very difficult thing for her to navigate,
Yeah,
and also a
especially
very
for the
difficult thing for the
specific,
world to navigate with her.
yeah, especially for the specific variety of thoughts and the of little check marks on the spectrum she's got.
Yeah, I mean that exploring relationships and things becomes a big deal for that character going forward as well, just through season one and into season two. But just I think just for just as far as season one goes, even one of the few two episode arcs they deal with is centered entirely around, navigating sexual relationships for someone like Matilda, and they do it incredibly well. It is very well written, and
Yeah.
there's no Aesop, is the thing.
Nope.
The message that the show has for that whole area isn't any moral grandstanding or anything like that. All the show has to say about that is it's very messy and complicated, and I don't know.
Yeah, which
because
is
because that's the message that Matilda has to get, because there's a whole big issue about all of this going on around it. I don't want to go into it too much because I want people to watch the show because it's really bloody
no,
good.
but like
But
but I think it does a good job. It does a good job teaching her that I think it's another way in which she's prepared to deal with the rest of the world. Um, and that the world sometimes isn't going to care about her condition, not because
well,
not because the world doesn't, because in this example, actually the world cares a lot about
yeah,
her
the
condition.
problem isn't just that the world doesn't care; it's that sometimes it does.
And sometimes it cares too much.
Yeah, and she
But I think it's
spends.
also a good example of like the fact that she's learning the lesson that like, hey, sex, love, romance, all that, it's complicated and messy no matter who you are.
Case in point, Nicholas and Alex,
Yeah.
who are very dysfunctional in and of themselves, uh, which I'm sure we might be able to get into. But yeah, I really like that through that entire storyline. Matilda is basically sitting here going, I don't understand this, because of course she doesn't. She's autistic. Uh,
Yeah.
I don't understand why there are different standards for me than there are for other people. And at one point, she actually has like a really tense emotional discussion with Nicholas, where she's sort of saying, you I don't understand. Like, is it because of my age? Is it because I'm autistic? Is it because I'm a woman? And she says all
And
these
it's
things,
just
and
like, oh, it's
Nicholas
kind
just
of
says yes. Honestly, yes.
yes.
It's
It's kind of all of
yeah.
those.
It is all of those things, and it's not fair. You're completely right. It isn't fair. It is a mess, but that is how the world is. And I don't
And even
understand it.
those are all things that put you at more risk.
Yeah, exactly. And I don't
And
understand it
you
very
know,
well either. He's sort of saying, I don't get it, but you
but that's
kind
how
of,
it is.
that's just how it is, and you've got to learn to navigate that.
Yeah, and it's and part of what I like about that moment too is it actually helps her feel, or not only helps her feel, but helps her genuinely come off, which is good because she is in a lot of ways a normal person. It helps her feel a lot more normal because it's like, oh, hey, like you may be getting treated a little bit like the rules are different. When you look at it at the end of the day, you're just like everyone else in this department. Nobody really understands it. Everybody spends a lot of time being confused and scared before they get anywhere with it.
And
It's not
even
just
then,
you.
to be honest, let's be real, the confusion never really ends.
The, the closest way you can ever come to the
You
confusion
just get
ending
used
is
to
if
it.
if you just end up with one person your
Yeah,
whole life and it manages to be as uncomplicated as possible.
exactly, because every person you're involved with, things are going to be different.
Yeah. Which means going through at least some of that again every single time.
Yeah, I mean, like, just I'm at a point in my life where I've come to terms with the fact that I'm really not interested at the moment of doing that anymore.
Yeah.
it's it is there is just so many things that I would rather invest my energy in.
Yeah. No, I totally get it. I spend time in that place every now and then.
Yeah, it is messy, it's complicated, it's confusing. Every new person you have to start from the beginning again. Fuck it, I'm gonna focus on writing stories.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's one of the things I really like about Nicholas as the parental figure, right? is that one of the things he does right, I feel like, is that he doesn't overprotect
Nope.
either of them, not Genevieve either, either of the girls from the world. The one, like, he is not a good parental figure in many, many ways.
Yeah.
Uh, like, he gets better, but
Yeah.
the
I mean,
entire,
everything's
like,
gonna be okay.
exactly. Like that's his arc, is learning to be this parental figure and managing all this shit. But one thing he does consistently well throughout so much of the show is that he's very honest. He does not sugarcoat things for either Matilda or Genevieve. He is
Yep.
very upfront about the way the world is going to see them, and what it expects from them.
And about the fact that he's not entirely prepared for it. He
Yeah,
doesn't try to pretend like he's got it all
he
under
will
wraps,
he will ask them for advice sometimes.
which is honestly important even just as an older, fully fledged biological parent. Sometimes sometimes younger people are gonna teach you things. Everybody has a different path in life. And even when you have the same path, sometimes you forget things from the perspective you might have had previously. And although gaining new perspective on things can be good, every once in a while, something here or there is
Yeah, I
lost in
mean,
translation. And there's going to be a lot of times as a parent or even just somebody taking care of someone else, where even if you're the more quote unquote adult or prepared person, the people you are taking care of are going to have plenty to teach you. And even if they can't teach you that much about your own life, they can sure as hell teach you things that are going to help you help them better.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, I haven't been a teenager for a decade, but
Same.
I remember I remember well enough that the adults that I always got along best with were the ones that just were very frank and open with me and treated my thoughts and opinions with respect.
Yeah. Yeah, it makes a
Like,
big difference.
having when you're constantly in a position where you feel like you have none of the power and none of the understanding and none of the respect, and you're yearning for any of that, for all that, to be treated with the same respect as people who really are not that different from you at that point in
Yeah.
your development.
Especially because a lot of times in that situation, not only are you not getting those things, but you're constantly expected to give all of them at once to people around you while not getting them.
I mean, it's been said many a time, but as a teenager, you're expected to act like an adult, but are still treated as a child.
Yep.
So when you're experiencing
Worst of
that,
both worlds.
yeah. So when you're experiencing that, it to have someone who is one of your elders turn around to you and say, "I don't understand what I'm doing. What should I do here?" That can mean a lot. But at the same time, it's a double-edged sword, because the person that often cops that as the most functional person in that household is Genevieve, who is not at all mentally prepared or to deal with that kind of pressure and stress.
No, because not only does she have her own stuff going on, she may be the neurotypical one in the family, but she's also 14. She's by far the youngest.
Yeah, she's definitely intelligent, and
Yeah,
she is very grounded and capable, but she's still figuring out who she is. She's not ready to figure out who Nicholas is.
yeah,
And it's interesting because it's one of the things the show never doesn't address directly a lot,
that's true.
but it simultaneously never shies away from showing it, that she is, constant. It's because one of the things about this show, like that this show does super well, is juxtapositions.
The
Uh,
entire show is a juxtaposition.
Pretty much, and what with we'll probably dive into that in a second, but for a starting point, Genevieve is constantly shown in these juxtapositions, where at school she is floundering, like in her social life as well, but that's where a lot of that occurs. She is floundering, trying to figure out what she's supposed to do, how she's supposed to act, who she is, and who she wants to be, and all these things. She doesn't know she is drowning. and then at home she is the responsible one.
when she's really not supposed to be.
Yeah, she was trying to like Nicholas is trying. He is working on it, and he gets progressively better. By the end of season one, he is definitely sitting in that parental role much more firmly. Still flawed, very flawed, but
Of
doing much
course.
better. But especially early
Every
on,
full-fledged parent is anyways.
yeah, true. But especially early on, he is Genevieve is picking up a lot of the slack in basically teaching him how to deal with Matilda and responsibilities and just being in the role he is in, which she's not really ready for, and we know that because we see what she's like when she's not at home or when she's alone.
How are you going to teach somebody else to be something you're not supposed to be yet yourself?
Exactly. So even though it never directly talks about her struggling with that, it does show it through those juxtapositions, and those juxtapositions are what they make. Like it's like you said, the show is just a series of juxtapositions collaged together, and that's what makes it work so well because like that's what dramedy is as a genre.
Yeah.
It is
Yeah,
by
it really is. It's
default.
two very contrasting things.
It is a constant sort of tug of war between finding the joy and humor in our darkest and saddest moments and the sadness behind our most joyous ones. Like if I go like going back to the funeral in the very first episode and what directly follows is a perfect example of that because the funeral is funny and it's when they get home and they're by themselves and they have their little dance that we feel the real emotional weight behind it all.
Yeah, it's pretty heavy.
And the show is constantly doing that where things are going horribly wrong and it's really funny, and then we have these quiet moments of conversation between the characters and things like that, and that's where they hit you in the feels.
Yeah, and I mean, said it already plenty, but it's just another very true to life thing that the show does well is that's a lot of times when that stuff tends to happen in real life too. You're not gonna have your big emotional breakdowns, your cries, your sobs, your moments of needing a hug or just needing to be with somebody in public. A lot of times
You can't.
the play a lot of times not you can't, and the place it's easiest to feel alone is when you're surrounded by the most other people.
Absolutely. Like we see that when Genevieve first goes back to school, right? Where she goes there and she's surrounded by people. People start talking about I can't remember his name. Leonard? It might be Leonard. The pretty boy starts apologizing
Oh,
for some horrible shit he did in the first episode.
right. The fuck boy.
Uh, you know, and it does seem like a reasonably genuine apology, I guess, as much as those ever are. But he keeps talking
I
about it.
feel like at
He's
the very
so
least,
he is so unaware. Like he clearly has not thought about his timing or where he's going with this because he keeps talking about his dad, and it just fucking breaks her. And she just cannot interact with anyone like aside from her two close friends for the rest of that day. She just cannot manage it.
nope.
I think that's a good example of what you were talking about. How it's it's hard you to like when you're grieving or dealing with stress or whatever. The worst place to be a lot of the time, like a lot of the time, some people crave that being surrounded by people in those times, and fair enough to those people. But a lot of the time, the worst place to be when you're dealing with things like that is around other people.
Yeah. No, and even when it's not, part of the problem you see is a lot of those people who want to be around a lot of other people in that situations too. Even then, for a lot of the people who want that, it's not necessarily a healthy way to handle it because unless you are and I mean very specific kind of person, the more people you are around, the harder it is to process those kinds of emotions
for
and
sure. I
just
mean,
let them out.
yeah, I mean, it's
Like,
exactly because you have to keep your public face on.
yeah, and even if you don't feel that, like, it's just the people, if the people you're around aren't people you really care about and are close to, that also just makes it harder to process that stuff in general. People who aren't on the list of closeness to actually be a part of your pain and the things you're going through,
Absolutely.
or at least a really helping hand on the shoulder, become noise to
Yeah,
processing
and
grief
I mean,
and pain and
it
trauma.
it also doesn't help that you know intrinsically, right? That even if these people aren't doing it intentionally, a lot of them are trying to make you feel better because you make them sad.
Yeah,
uh,
a lot of them have, unfortunately, selfish motivations or
even if it's not by intent, right? A lot of the time, people
no, I mean, there's
when
a
they
certain amount
yeah
of selfishness in everything we do, right? Even if
yeah
you're doing something for someone else, you're also like that because that person makes you happy or whatever. There's like it's impossible not to be a tiny bit selfish with that
yeah,
stuff.
and
Like
that just
that's
makes
just how we
that
work.
just makes it even harder because then you try and keep the facade up even more for the benefit of these people because you know you're being a downer on their mood. That's why it's so significant that she's able to with those two close friends, even though those two close friends, especially Tallulah, are very dubious people.
Yeah,
You know, but that's who she's
Tallulah.
got and that's who she's close with, and she's able to share that moment share that with them, and that makes her feel somewhat better compared to Leonard, who just by talking about it breaks her.
Yeah, yeah, because he won't shut up, won't let her be alone and process his pain, and really more importantly, he's the worst example of that thing we talked about. He's the genuinely bad example of somebody who like it's not just mildly selfish motivation. His way of being there or trying to think about or be nice to somebody who's in a bad situation is entirely self-serving.
Oh,
He may not be there because
absolutely.
someone else is making him sad,
He's
but
not
he is
even.
entirely trying to make himself feel good. He's trying to make himself like feel like he is being a good, nice, helpful, understanding guy.
Yeah, I mean, exactly. And you can tell because not once through that conversation does he say something like, "Oh, I'm sorry for what happened to you. I'm sorry you lost your dad or whatever." The entire time
No.
is, "I'm sorry for what I did to you." And it is
Yeah.
all about
Me,
absolving
me,
himself
me.
of guilt. Yeah, it's very self-centered. And therefore
Yeah,
very good writing because it's very accurate to reality, haha.
it's
Because
honestly
some
kind
people
of
are just
it's
like
honestly
that.
kind of it's honestly kind of the meme of like, you know, people talk about this and talk to you and check on you. Has anybody asked lately how you're doing?
Yeah, and but even that in and of itself, right, is a juxtaposition because it is immediately contrasted by how Barb and Tallulah handle it, where they
True.
just sort of sit there and be with her and are there for whatever she needs.
Sometimes that's the best thing you can do for someone. And the important thing about the idea of being there for someone, whether it's silently or what, that I love is it is the most consistent form of comfort and support there is in the world. Being there, being with someone, being around them is it's the only one thing that you can always do for somebody else, no matter what else is going on. Nothing ever, I mean, every once in a while, sometimes really just needs to be alone, but nothing can ever truly invalidate the value of just being there.
Yeah, and that
And not even
closeness.
necessarily physically, but
Yeah,
being an ear to listen, a shoulder to lean on, just a silent, companionable presence, even. It doesn't matter what form it takes.
yeah. I mean, you've nailed like what is at the core of so much of like the relationship between the three main characters is that just they make a point of being there when they need it. Like it's a very common Aesop or trope or whatever in, you know, media surrounding families, however dysfunctional they are. But it doesn't. I feel like this particular show does it very well,
I
right?
would say
Where
so.
because they don't need to constantly. Part of it is they don't need to constantly say out loud to each other. Like, I'm the first. I'm the first person to say that if the first piece of writing advice someone gives you is show don't tell, ignore them.
Yeah,
But
you can tell some things. Hell, you can tell a lot of things if you're smart about it.
yeah, but sometimes it has its place, and this is one of those places. You don't.
Yeah,
It is when it comes to the aesop of your story needs to be able to demonstrate those aesops without saying this is the moral of the story.
yeah. Every once in a while, explaining. Hmm. You always
Basic,
want to explain things, but explaining things too directly sometimes damages them and even corrodes the point you're trying to make.
yeah, and again, like some of the like sweetest scenes we get in Everything's Gonna Be Okay is just Nicholas, Genevieve, and Matilda like cuddled up together in the same space in those early episodes, just being there, so there's someone there.
Yeah,
But
it's something all three of them need.
yeah, they do eventually move on from that because they also have very quickly realize that they are their own people and that they do need their space because they are all people who need their space
Yep.
as well, and so they have to transition to those first lonely nights, I guess.
As an ambivert, I really vibe with Genevieve.
Yeah, I mean, I would say ambivert suits her as a label pretty well because she's someone who will generally seek out solitude first to process things, and will then, when she's figured her shit out, go and be social.
And also partially partially mood things.
Yeah,
Sometimes she's ready to be it's something I definitely personally vibe with is sometimes feeling like you have so much energy, so many spoons, as a lot of people I know like to call it, for interacting with other people. You're ready to be the first person to talk to somebody who's in pain, the first person to like support somebody who needs a little help, the first person to just talk and be present and be around people. And then other times it's just like, oh, wow, I need to be in my room in the dark under a blanket doing something by myself right now. Get other people away from me.
yeah, I get that. I lean a lot more strongly to the introversion side of things of that, where when I want to be social and it's with people I want to be social with, I can be one of the loudest voices in the room. But 9 times out of 10, I'm probably going to be like more content just with my head in the clouds somewhere, getting lost in some media or story or whatever, because that's just where I like to exist. But I think most
Yeah.
people have a bit of that duality to them, right? I don't think there's anyone out there who is truly 100% an introvert or extrovert.
No, absolutely not. I think the only real reason the term ambivert exists is for people who lean much closer to being almost an even 50-50.
Probably. And it also just comes in handy for explaining to people that sometimes you want to be alone, sometimes you want to hang out. Get over it.
Yeah. Yeah, no, absolutely. But I mean, I think about it a lot because, like I said, I am
Yeah.
fairly close to 50-50, and it's something I've noticed more since I started working more in the public space, which is one of the reasons I can't wait to do voice acting and stuff full time. Because right now I work at a grocery store and as in a leadership position too, and it's come to make me realize that I really do have a certain amount of extroversion and a certain amount of introversion because I have such an easy time being way more outgoing and social and everything and just interacting with people first and being proactive at work than I normally am. But I've noticed since I started doing that at work, I'm actually more introverted than I ever was before outside of work because it seems like I'm using all of my once again to use a term a lot of people I know like I seem to be using all of my extrovert spoons to work and then I don't have any left outside of it.
Yeah, I mean, everyone has a different like everyone has. This is a more the terminology I hear, but everyone has a social battery, right?
Social battery is another good one. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah.
and everyone has a different size social battery, and
And
sometimes
different things that charge and drain it.
exactly, and different things that charge and drain it, and sometimes you need to recharge that battery. And also, environment just plays a part into that as well. Like, some people are going to be way more energetic and extroverted in certain environments compared to others. Honestly, like you even see that in the like in Everything's Gonna Be Okay, where all of
Ow,
the
my wrist.
characters fluctuate, right, depending on who they're with and what the environment they're in is, because that's just another way that it's very true to life. Weirdly, Genevieve seems to be more extroverted. Well, I wouldn't say at school, I suppose, but she's when she's with Barb and Tallulah, she's very extroverted. Compared to when she's just regularly at school or when she's at home, I think she tends to be more introverted as well. And I think part of that
Yeah.
is because she just has to, she's dealing with just recharging constantly because of the pressure on her to be the adult, compared to like Nicholas has no idea how to navigate social situations, but he is consistently the loudest person in the room.
Yes.
But a lot of that,
He's simultaneously socially awkward and loud and outgoing.
yeah, because being an extrovert and being good at being an extrovert are not the same thing. Although, to be fair,
Nope.
we do learn that a lot of the way he acts around other people is a performance. A lot of what he is doing, the reason he takes charge, he is so out there and energetic, is because he is desperately trying to understand how to be a presence in a social situation.
Yeah.
Honestly, the unfortunate thing with the show and with doing series like TV series or long book series or whatever, whenever we do this, is that we try to keep things to roughly an hour, but we could keep going so long because there are so many nuances to the writing in Everything's Gonna Be Okay that we could easily talk about this for another hour or two without repeating anything, I think, or at least
Yeah,
minimal
for
amounts of
sure.
repeating things. Uh,
We could talk about this a long time.
Unfortunately, we have pretty much. Technically, we've gone over the hour. We'll see how that goes in the edit. I think it will probably still go over the hour. Suffice to say, though, that for all the reasons we've said, because it treats dramatic moments with the appropriate gravitas and care, but still has the willingness to acknowledge the silliness of everyday human existence and without its characters becoming caricatures, and because it uses that juxtaposition so well to create poignancy and realism, because it uses that narratively to make the audience laugh when society says they should cry and vice versa. For all those reasons, Everything's Going to Be Okay is just such a fantastic example of a dramedy and of how to blend two genres to create something new and a different.
And is a big part of why dramedy will always be so prevalent and always be one of, if not the most common genre blend, is simply because
It's the truth.
despite
It's true.
despite not being anything like good or bad or light and dark, they are actually a very yin yang relationship, not just in how they contrast, but I would say every dramatic situation has a little bit of comedy in it, and everything that's funny has at least a little bit of genuineness and seriousness to it, or it probably wouldn't be funny.
Exactly, and it's because of those things, right? Because of those juxtapositions, that blending, those mixes, that sense of realism, that
They highlight and enhance each other.
they highlight and enhance each other, and at the same time they make the genre a very different viewing or reading or whatever experience to either of those genres on their own, because it feels much more true to life as a result.
Yeah,
And
yeah, you have either one of those things just mostly by itself, and it actually becomes quite, at best, fantastical, at worst, just fake.
yeah, not necessarily, like, not always, certainly, like absurdist humor exists for a reason, and drama is such a captivating genre for a reason. But as a general rule, they are never going to feel, or they will much less rarely feel true to life than a story that's willing to pick and choose from both and play with both. And that's
Yeah,
what this show does very well, and that's what makes the show so good.
in short, everything's gonna be okay, and it's a good show.
Had to get one last one in there, anyway, didn't you? Uh, on that note,
Listen, man, it's one of the best titles ever. It's so real. It's a sentence that has such a strong, strong place in life. Like,
yeah, it does. It is simultaneously the vibe of the show and the aesop of the show all at once, clearly stated from the very beginning, as well as just a true to life sentiment that you can feel. But
yeah,
we're going to get
in
into
your
another
bones.
tangent that's going to take us another 20 minutes to get through just on the title in a second, so I'm going to cut it there. Uh,
Why
if you
not?
uh, if you are listening to this on Apple Podcast or Spotify or anywhere else that I've managed to get this distributed in the meantime, you can also find Stories Across Borders on my website, radfordwrites.com, where I also share the transcripts for the stories that my guests tend to perform during the fourth episodes of each cycle. You can also find links there to my books on Amazon, to my YouTube channel, which I'm trying to do more with, and also to my Twitter, DanielWright7, where I occasionally tweet about things. As always, you will be able to see much more of John in working with me in various projects, including more episodes of this podcast.
Absolutely. I'm not intending to go anywhere. I love this podcast.
I really can't get rid of him. I've tried.
It's not easy. I'm pretty persistent.
He's like a tumor.
I am inevitable.
All right, well, we'll end it there. Thanks for listening, folks, and we'll see you next time.